Maestro Bramwell Tovey is our guest. He will be conducting,
yes,
leading, talking on Saturday night and on Monday, Feb 28th at 8 p.m. It's the Canadian premiere of the Dr. Atomic Symphony, but there will also be Haydn, Mahler, and that will lead into John Adams' work, Dr. Atomic Symphony. Who's John Adams?
John Adams is the preeminent American composer of the present time. He has visited Vancouver. He's conducted the VSO. He wrote his work, Naive and Sentimental Music, for 4 international orchestras, of which the VSO was one. Leading composer of operas. The Vancouver Opera have just had a very successful production of his Nixon in China during last year's
Robert
Olympics.
Orth, the baritone.
Absolutely fabulous.
Went to high school with him.
That's
hilarious. I know.
And when he comes off that plane at the beginning, he looks like
he looks
Tricky Dicky.
like Tricky Dicky. He sure does. So now to Robert Oppenheimer, who invented the atomic bomb, who split the atom.
He split the atom, which of course many people had seen in theory before. Adams likes to write operas based on hot contemporary themes. So Nixon in China was 15 years after Nixon's famous visit to China. He wrote an opera called The Death of Klinghoffer about the assassination of a passenger by a Palestinian terrorist on a boat in the Mediterranean. That's a very controversial opera because of the subject matter. And he wanted to write with his collaborator Peter Sellers, the director, another opera. Peter Sellers, the director, the opera director, not the famous late English comedian.
He was gone.
No, there's another one now.
Oh, good.
Perhaps only so well known in the opera world. But he wanted to write an opera based upon this theme because, of course, it's universal. And he wrote an opera based upon the facts as an opera. One would say, well, if you want to do something based upon the facts, why not do a documentary? But really the reason is very simple. Opera and music, in particular, is a way of expressing those things that are inexpressible in a documentary. Thoughts, feelings, passions. The music is very passionate in the opera, and he extracted a symphony with all the symphonic material, the contrasting episodes. He extracted that into a 25-minute work, which he actually wrote originally for the St. Louis Symphony and conductor David Robertson. We're giving the Canadian premiere this weekend. And this is a piece that deals with the drive of individuals wanting to create a great scientific achievement, forgetting for the fact perhaps the consequences of it, but also about the drive of human beings and about the philosophical consequences of what they achieved. And a piece that ultimately deals with the frailty of humans to live with each other, that such a thing has to be.
And as you know so well, Oppenheimer, when he split the atom, thought it would be a good thing. Or perhaps it would lead us to a good place. And now we have 23,000 nuclear weapons in the world. He was also eccentric a bit, wasn't he? A bit of a loner in Los Alamos.
Yes, he was a homosexual, and he was hounded for his homosexuality, and this led ultimately, I think, to his suicide. But he was hounded by the McCarthyites and
Un-American Activities Committee
Un-American Activities, when in fact, of course, he was really just a scientist working in a very high-pressured field. I don't want to get into the rights and wrongs of atomic bombs. I think what music can do, and I think what this opera does, and what this symphony does to a certain extent, is it addresses the issues. The driving force of the music, also the restraint of the music at times, the lament at the end. All of these things are expressed in music and take us to those places that perhaps internally we only live
that in
ourselves.
The opera, the aria is "Batter My Heart." At the end.
The John Donne, the famous John Donne poem. Robert Oppenheimer was a great fan of John Donne's poetry, and this was a particularly favorite poet of his, and Peter Sellers, the director and librettist, didn't mind bringing this. In fact, thought it was a good idea to bring this particular poetry into the libretto, and it gives the libretto enormous scope.
So let's listen to Dr. Atomic, the symphony.
Yeah.
Yes, that is him. He was really scrawny.
course, listening to this music, you hear jagged rhythms, you hear regularity, but you also see disintegration, you hear disintegration. And it's sometimes for people to say, well, how can you express this in music? Well, you can't express it in music. You can't talk about the tragedy of atomic bombs. But what you can do, I think, with music is you can begin to articulate those thoughts that perhaps words can't quite touch upon. When you have a large orchestra of musicians, you can have different stratas of listening. You can listen to the percussion, and on top of that, you can hear the wailing of the winds and the trumpets. And I think contemporary music seeks to express thoughts of our contemporary society. This is a very exciting work to listen to, just as an abstract piece of music, simply because of all the contrasts and the use of different colors and rhythms. But the driving impetus behind it, the fact that it's actually written around this terrifying theme, makes it particularly effective.
And it forces us to go back in history to figure out what was going on then. I mean, if you weren't alive.
Yes, which I wasn't and you weren't.
I hope not. When this was happening.
Especially you.
Especially me. But do you know what I mean? Like even the Nixon in China opera, and if you didn't know about Nixon going to China and Mao and all of that, it made you want to know more. And to understand the opera, you almost had to know more. And in this case, the man who split the atom, not to know more about him is a tragedy. Do you know that he ate peanut butter and whiskey?
I didn't know that, but I don't like either of those things, so I find it particularly
in Los
repulsive.
Alamos, because he could live very sparely, and there's just so much more we don't know about Oppenheimer and, of course, John Adams. Do you know what he's working on now? Is he going forth to do another?
John is working on all kinds of things at once, most of the time. He's a very in-demand composer. He does a lot of conducting and very youthful in spirit. Lives down on the west coast of the United States and is very much a West Coast figure. He's a very warm, friendly, effusive man, and really has articulated the last 20 years of West Coast contemporary life and music. A brilliant man.
Yeah. So if you connect Haydn, Mahler, and John Adams, what's the thread that runs through for you?
For me, the thread that runs through is really the story or the evolution of the symphony that went from this dry classical process of fun, tragedy, allied with humor, to the passion and the angst of Mahler, through to the way John Adams turned that passion and angst on its head to describe, as it were, a separate subject entirely, where music actually describes the experience of something as horrendous as the atomic bomb. The great thing about music is that you don't necessarily say, well, it describes this one thing. Music speaks to different people in different ways.
For sure.
And composers intend that. Music should speak on several levels. So when you listen to it many times, you get something different out of it every time.
Well, that's the glory of it, because no matter what it means to you, it means something different to me.
And that's
same
equally
as
valid.
A book or a poem, a song, all of that. Now, about this other famous opera, the Bramwell Tovey opera, called The Inventor.
Yes.
What's that journey been like?
Well, I spent the last 3.5 years writing The Inventor. I think the last time I was in here, I was in the middle of orchestrating it. It was premiered in Calgary at the end of January. It was, say so myself, it went really well. It was a great success. We had wonderful reviews. We're actually going to play it in concert with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra next year.
Really?
So you people can hear the music.
So just the music. You're not you're not doing what John Adams did, where you take an opera and make it a symphony.
No, I'm not. I've actually taken some of my opera and turned it into a trumpet concerto, oddly enough, but that was performed before the opera. That was something from last year. What we're doing is performing the opera with the original cast live on stage, and we'll be doing it in a semi-acted fashion with projections. We had a lot of video projections in the original production, so it's a very exciting process.
And the opera is about a rather seedy character.
Very seedy.
A seedy Canadian, a bit of a scam artist named Sandy Keith Jr.
The nephew of the brewer, Alexander Keith, and somebody that the Keith family always tried to disown. He was a smuggler, a reprobate, a murderer, a terrorist, all kinds of things, and eventually he built a bomb that exploded as it was being loaded onto an ocean-going liner at Bremerhaven. He took his own life, but it was then traced that this man of many aliases was actually the son of the brother of the brewer. He was, it's a dreadful part of Canadian history, but of course it's one individual who was very corrupt, very evil, and yet was very much liked by his peers. He was a wonderful father to one of his families. To the other family, he never even met them. He left the wife pregnant with twins when she was in New York, just abandoned her. And so he was an odd character. I guess there would be all kinds of clinical diagnoses that could be made about Alexander Keith, but above all, of course, great stuff for the opera.
Of course. Well, the dark and the light.
Exactly.
The scam artist comes to life on the stage in The Inventor.
Yes.
How nice to see you.
It's great to see you, Fanny. Thank you.
Saturday night, you'll be doing the premiere of Dr. Atomic Symphony, and on Monday as well at 8 p.m.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, at the Orpheum.
At the Orpheum.
Nice to see you, Maestro.
Thank you very much.
Maestro Bramwell Tovey.